Hey guys, Jake Steele, Iron and Steel. This is podcast episode number 19. And as always, thank you very much for being here. It is greatly appreciated. And again, thank you to everybody that reaches out. I get just countless messages every week from people that go out of their way to contact me just to say that they enjoy the podcast. And it's a little unexpected, but it is has been great and very much appreciated to read those messages. So the only thing I would ask is if you're going to take the time to do that, don't just tell me. Please let your friends and family know. Share the link. Share the website, ironandsteel.com, all that stuff. So if you could do that, that would be very helpful. And but again, I do appreciate the messages. So speaking of the website, ironandsteel.com, while you're there, scroll to the bottom of the page, hit the subscribe button, punch in your email, and then, yeah, you're going to be on an email list, but, I'm going to send you an email, maybe 2 a week. And it's just to let you know when there's fresh content, whether it's, a new article on the site or a fresh podcast or whatever. So, again, it just takes 2 seconds. It's not that big of a deal. You'll get an email or 2 a week. And, that's just, that's all it is. So really no big deal. Super helpful if you want to be kept up to date on what's going on with Iron and Steel. So speaking of which, today I went and picked up a fresh batch of t-shirts that I had drawn up and screen printed, and they're fucking killer. It's hard to describe what they look like, but they're on the site. If you hop over there, you can check them out. But they have like a sort of like an 80s or 90s VHS horror film kind of art theme to it. So again, a little bit difficult to describe, but picture like a horror film from the 80s or 90s. And if you can remember back that far, or if you were if you were even alive back then. But if you can remember that era and kind of what the VHS boxes look like for these horror films, the artwork and stuff, this t-shirt's very reminiscent, or at least sort of a nod to that. So they're fucking awesome. It's a full back print and then an upper left chest print on these, and they're like a really dark charcoal, almost black, dark charcoal gray colored t-shirt. But yeah, again, hard to describe, but hop over to the site, ironandsteel.com. You can check them out for yourself. And the second of the serial killer shirts, Richard Ramirez, is on ironandsteel.com as well. And a bunch of other fucked up, weird, awesome, stupid, great merchandise over there too. So when you get a chance, feel free to just jump over there and check it out. So speaking of the site, today I'm going to read you the part 2 of a 2-part story that I wrote and published on ironandsteel.com. It's called Sometimes They Come Back. I actually, probably a half a dozen or so podcasts ago, I read the first part. And then I just kind of forgot about the second part. And so, I figured I better read that, and that's what we're going to get to today. So if you didn't read the article or articles, or didn't listen to the last podcast, the previous podcast where I read the part 1, if you didn't do any of that and don't know what I'm talking about, this is a 1930 Ford Model A pickup that I found in Central Oregon. And I bought it, sold it immediately against my better judgment, bought it back shortly after. And so, it's just kind of a strange story. Bought and sold several times. And so hence the name, Sometimes They Come Back. So again, on the website, you can check out both articles are both there with photos of the truck and a bunch of other cars that were kind of in the mix during the back and forth of buying this thing multiple times. But and again, if you go back and listen to 5 or 6 podcasts ago, it's called Sometimes They Come Back Part 1. And so today's Part 2. So anyway, without further ado, I'm going to jump right into it. At the end, we'll do some Q&A. I did get a few questions this week, so we'll address those, and then we'll say our goodbyes. But for now, kick back and relax, and I'll tell you how it went down. Okay, here we go. So again, this is part 2. If you didn't listen to part 1 or read part 1 of Sometimes They Come Back, all I can say is you should go back and read it or listen to it, because it was kind of a fucked up deal, but it made for a good story. The story of how this truck came about is an interesting one. So again, Sometimes They Come Back part 1, about 6 podcasts ago, or it's on the site. So if you're a lazy cracker and fucking can't be bothered to do that, I'll give you the nickel tour right now. Basically, I find this Model A truck. It's an older restoration, but it's like really well done, super bitchin' truck. Really, really, really nice. It's in Central Oregon, which is about 3 hours away. And the deal, again, it was a good story, but it was a fucked up, clunky deal. I was able to finally put it together. And where we leave off at the end of part 1 is essentially I'm pulling in my driveway after, 3 days of dealing with it and a full day of driving to get it and coming, driving back and all this stuff. And so where we leave off is basically I'm pulling in the driveway and I'm thinking, I'm keeping this fucker because it is a bitchin' truck. So anyway, that's the kind of the short version of part 1. You should go read it for yourself. Again, I'm doing these all in one shot now, reading them all just in one take rather than, try to make every single thing perfect and edit it all together paragraph by paragraph. It just seems unnatural doing it that way. And, even if there are imperfections or whatever, if I stumble over a word or you hear paper rustling around in the background as I'm like reading through, because I'm literally just reading this off of printed paper. So it's not going to be perfect. If you want something perfect and polished, I don't know, start your own podcast, I guess. You can do it however the fuck you want, but this is how we're going to do this. So again, the end of part 1, I'm pulling in the driveway and thinking this is a keeper. So here goes part 2. The next day, I get a text message from my neighbor down the road. His name is John, and John's a super nice guy. He's the kind of guy that you could ask a favor, any favor in the world, and he would do his best to help you. Just a very good guy, and the type of person you would want as your neighbor. Now, a couple of months earlier, John had stopped by to see a beautiful 40 Ford Coupe that I had. The car really was amazing, and he drooled all over it over the course of 3 separate visits to see it. For some reason, though, he was a little hesitant to pull the trigger, and by the 3rd visit, I politely let him know that if he didn't want it, I was going to have to list it for sale. So he told me half-heartedly to go ahead and list it, but before he left, he said with some hesitation, quote, "So what do you think is going to happen when you post it? Like, how long do you think I have if I change my mind?" Now, this car was a 10 out of 10. Hammered fucking stance, jet black paint, a built flathead, black walls. It was nice. So, I told him my honest opinion. I said, "John, this car will not last a full day if I post it." Now, I meant it, but he just kind of chuckled and looked at me a little funny, said thank you, and left. Well, fast forward a day later. I hear a car rumbling down my driveway again. Again, it was John. I went out to greet him and he asked to see the 40 Ford Coupe again. "No problem," I say. So we go down to the shop, and as we're standing there and he's looking it over for the 4th time, John abruptly sticks his hand out and says, "Okay, done deal. I'll take it." Now, the only problem was, as soon as he had left the night before, I posted that car for sale on my Instagram account. And within 2 hours, I had taken a deposit from a serious buyer that I knew. The car did not last a day, just like I had told him. Not even close. John couldn't believe it, and he was visibly disappointed. So from then on, there was a heightened sense of urgency in his voice anytime he spotted a car of mine that he may have some interest in. So now I have this beautiful Model A pickup, and I'm getting a text message from John. The message reads, "Hi Jake, what's the Model A you have sitting in your driveway?" I explained that I had just brought it home from Central Oregon. He goes on to ask, "Well, how much is it?" Now, at this point, I didn't know the truck well enough to price it too far out there, and honestly, I really was thinking that I was going to keep it. So, I just kind of spit out a number. John called right away and asked a couple more basic questions, and then he simply said, "Okay, well, I'll take it then." And just like that, it was done. He came down, looked it over, and he loved it. He hands me the money and he asks if I could drive it to his place. I don't think he had ever driven a Model A before. And honestly, at his size, which he's probably 6'2" or more, and how big of a guy he is, he's probably 6'2", 275, I would guess. He's a big guy. Anyway, at his size, I wondered what he was thinking buying something that he'd be so cramped in. He never even sat in the truck. He just said he wanted it, and that was that. Well, it turns out my curiosity regarding how well he'd fit in the Model A was justified. About a week later, I get a call from John. He said, "Well, I think if you hear of anybody that wants a nice Model A truck, I think I'd sell this one. I can't fit in it." Now, he didn't ask me to buy the truck back or anything. He just said that he would probably sell it if somebody wanted it. He also added that he was just as happy with it sitting in his garage because he liked just looking at it. My kind of guy. So a month goes by and I thought about that truck a little, but in the meantime, I had bought another couple of Model A's. One is a 29 Roadster and the other a 30 Coupe. So the Roadster was in the shop and spoken for right away, which I should have kept that one too. But the Coupe was still on my trailer the day after I got back from picking it up. Now, this thing was like a two-tone brown, an older restoration car that had sat for about 30 or so years. It was a nice car, but it was kind of a tough color. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do with it just yet, but I wouldn't have to wait long to get the answer. "Hi, Jake. What's the story on that little coupe you have there on the trailer?" It was John again. Now, I didn't think anything of it. I just figured he was curious because he just liked old cars. Surely, he wasn't asking because he wanted to buy it. I mean, after all, he already knew that he didn't fit in a Model A. He went on, "What's the price range on a car like that?" And again, I had just bought this car and I had barely walked around it in the daylight. So, without thinking, I threw out a roundabout number and just thinking we were having a conversation about old cars, but to my surprise, his reply was, "I'll take it." So, John has now bought 2 Ford Model A's from me, and he can't fit in either one of them. Now, this is fine with me. I'm not going to stand in his way. And with each car he bought from me, he would say something like, "I'd like to just trade these in on the next 40 Ford Coupe you get." So we would just sort of chuckle about it, and that was that. A month or so later, though, I got my hands on a car that I knew right away he was gonna want. And I kind of knew just what I wanted too. That Model A pickup. Now, it wasn't a 40 Ford, but this thing had the same look as the 40 I had had that John had wanted so badly. The second I brought it home, I figured it would just be a matter of time. The car in question was a 1938 Ford convertible with 39 trim. It was chopped, it had a great stance, absolutely jet black paint, laser straight, red interior, the works. And the part that I knew would appeal the most to John? Under that traditional looking car was a complete, straight up street rod. It had a fuel injected ZZ4, automatic transmission, 9-inch rear, 4-wheel disc, power steering, air conditioning, everything you could imagine, it had it. This was a very high-end build, no backyard bullshit. You could tell at a glance that this was a $150,000 build, just looking at it for a second. To my surprise, John didn't stop by like a moth to a flame, as I had anticipated. A few days went by and I never even saw him. I gave him a call and found out that he was down with COVID, of all things, but would let me know when he was feeling better. He asked about the car, how much was it and all this stuff, but he seemed fairly uninterested. I thought, maybe I was wrong. So a month goes by and I'm driving this 38 convertible around a little bit here and there. It's one of those cars that just drives so well that it makes the rest of your stuff seem like a huge pile of shit. I didn't like that because I like my piles of shit. But anyway, one day I get a call from John. He's in noticeably better spirits, and right away he asks about that 38. He says, "Do you still have it?" I said, "Hell yeah." I told him I was saving it because I knew it was the perfect car for him. He kind of laughed and he said he would run by to have a look at it, but when he got to my house, he wasn't laughing. For a long time, these cars were pushed to the side. Nobody wanted them. A few really hot ones were put together, and their popularity has definitely grown. I had no idea that the car looked like this, John said with his mouth visibly agape. And he was right to lose his composure over this thing. It really was an insanely cool car with an absolutely killer look. Easily the best looking 38 or 39 convertible that I had ever seen. "Take it for a spin," I tell John. "It drives every bit as good as it looks and then some." He's hesitant. I'm watching him look this thing over and I can tell right away he's thinking, shit, this is going to cost me. And he was right. It was not a cheap car. But if a guy had it in his head that he wanted a car like that, he wasn't going to find a better one than this. Against his better judgment, John takes the car for a drive. He pulls away from my house, and it's about 15 minutes before I hear it rumbling back down toward me. He gets out and I say, "Well, what do you think?" Now, John doesn't say much at first, and I can tell he's in deep thought. I can also see in his eyes that he's remembering the last time he hesitated on a car that I had that he wanted. But this one was considerably more money. And it was enough to make a guy perspire as he pondered just how in the hell he was going to explain this one to his wife. And that's just what he was thinking. So John walks around the car a few times, and then a couple more times, and then out of the blue sky, he abruptly says, "Well, I should run. I could tell he was trying to break the spell that it had on him. And he was likely thinking that if he could just get away from the car, far, far away, he would come back to his senses and escape the trap that was this beautiful four-wheeled contraption with paint so fucking deep you could fall into it, which is seemingly just exactly what he had done. He walks back to his truck and gets in. He fires it up and rolls the window down in the sort of one last thing kind of way that these old guys do when they invite you over to have a few more words before they pull off. Here we go, I think to myself. John says, Jake, think about how much I could really buy it for and give me a call. Now, here's the thing. I had already given him the price. It was no chump change, but it was pretty fair for what the car was. It was also non-negotiable. But rather than cross that bridge right then and there and shut the whole thing down, I decided to let John stew on that car for a few days instead. I said, let me think about it, John. I'll give you a call. And with that, he nodded and pulled away, staring at the car all the way down my driveway. So that was a Tuesday, and I waited until Thursday afternoon to give him a call. I figured that when he answered, he was either going to have totally forgotten all about the whole thing altogether, or he would be chomping at the bit to hear what I had come up with because he wanted the car so badly. Turns out, it would be the latter. Hi, Jake. Well, what's the good word on that car? He got right to the fucking point. So did I. I said, John, the price is the price on that car. But I was thinking, how do you feel about letting that little Model A truck go? Now, as soon as I said this, I could tell he was hoping I'd say something like that. He said, sure, I'd be happy to trade it in. What are you proposing? So I made him an offer. The Model A pickup and a little bit, well, it wasn't a little bit, but the Model A pickup and X amount in cash. The deal I proposed was a fair deal, one that gave him back almost all that he was in the truck when he bought it, and it was one that I thought was the perfect compromise. I'll do it, John said. It's going to take me a few days to get that kind of money out of my bank. Do not sell the car. I will take it. I guess he still remembered how quickly the 40 sold. Later that afternoon, I get a text from John. I wasn't home. The text read, it will be 5 days before I have all the cash. The Model A is sitting in your driveway. This is a done deal. So I get back home and he was not kidding. He had the truck dropped off. It was in my driveway with the keys in it. And just like that, I owned a beautiful Model A pickup again. The only thing that was different about it was he had filled the gas tank. Everything else was exactly the same. So, what does the future hold? Well, it made its way back to me twice, so I figure maybe it should stick around at least for a little while. So far, all I've done is take the trim rings off the wire wheels and drive the shit out of it. It is absolutely the most fun you can have at 42 miles an hour. And I kind of like saying, the truck's so nice, I had to own it twice. Okay, that didn't go too badly. Only stumbled over a couple of words. Only read one part out of order and out of context. You probably didn't even notice. Only got weird for a split second. And that's show business, baby. Fuck. By the way, I've actually sold that truck for for a third time. In between the time that I published that article, which was a week ago, and the time that I'm recording this podcast, just right this second. Yeah, I actually sold that truck for a third time. So if it comes back, I will write another follow-up. But yeah, what can I say? I don't think it's coming back, though. The guy that bought it was pretty jacked and seems pretty happy about it. So yeah, I couldn't help myself, I guess. It's a short version of that. So anyway, ironandsteel.com again is the website. You can see both of those articles there, parts 1 and 2, and all of the photos associated with it. So like every car that I mentioned along the way that John bought and looked at, and every car that I bought and sold, you know, that was kind of part of the mix of buying and selling that truck a couple of times. Photos of all that stuff and the journey over to Central Oregon and the truck when I first saw it and a bunch of interesting stuff. There's photos of all of that in between the two articles, or between the two articles, there's photos of all of that. So ironandsteel.com, hit the subscribe button while you're there, yada, yada, yada. So, all right, without further ado, I'll blast through a few of these Q&A questions. I had quite a few come through. That story ran a little bit long, so we're just going to do 4 or 5 real quick and get through them. We'll save the rest for next week. So the first question was, how many cars... I'm the wrong person to ask this question. How many cars is too many? And then he goes on to clarify that he's talking about drivers. So, again, wrong person to ask, but the reasonable side of me would say that if you have more cars than you have space to store them, you probably have too many. That said, I break that rule all the time, but you know, if you're stuffing 3 cars in a 2-car garage and then one under a pop-up and one in an enclosed trailer and one at your buddy's house and one at your mother-in-law's house and 2 that you haven't picked up yet that you've already bought, you might have too many cars. But you know what? There's really not such a thing as too many cars. So hopefully that answers that question. Will you have, the next question was, will you have Richard Ramirez stickers? Yes, those are in the works, and within the next 2 weeks they will be up on the site. But yeah, the plan is to have all 3 of the serial killer shirts, designs as a shirt and as a sticker. So currently, right now, the John Wayne Racy shirt is on the site. There's a John Wayne Racy sticker, and then Richard Ramirez is there as a t-shirt, and the stickers are coming. And then Evan Daines is drawing the 3rd and final of the series of serial killer t-shirts as we speak. So yeah, in the end, all 3 will have shirts and stickers available. So one of the other questions was, what is your biggest pet peeve when it comes to car events? That's tough. Up here, and don't get me wrong, there are a ton of really incredible cars in the Pacific Northwest, whether you believe me or not. There's actually a shitload of historic cars up here, traditional hot rod and custom cars with a ton of history. But the sad part is most of those cars don't make it out for many events. So the events that tend to happen around here, except for very few, you know, my car club's drag race event and car show, you know, typically brings out some top tier cars. But outside of that, you know, these cars really just don't make it out often enough. So typically what you get up here at just your average jerk-off car show at a coffee shop or whatever, you just get muscle cars and rat rods and vans and tuner cars and other piles of excrement that I don't personally give a single squirt of piss about. But I'm not here to bag on anybody. If you're into that shit, great. But that would be my pet peeve, at least with the shows around here. It's a lot different, obviously, in other places. So, yeah, at least in my location, shitty cars is my biggest pet peeve. Second pet peeve would be these dick bags that are there chasing trophies, like as if it matters, it's like a $4 fucking plastic trophy. But I see guys get just like so worked up about this. I had a guy pull me into his like little office area in his shop where he keeps stuff. Man, he spent like a half an hour telling me all about all these trophies and where he won them, and his cars were shit. I mean, they were just fucking nothing cars. And he's like, that one right there, first place street roadster. And it's like at a Dairy Queen. Like, who gives a fuck? You know what I mean? So, but anyway, yeah, trophy chasers, I guess, and rat rotters and people that drive shitty cars to car shows. So I guess that would answer the pet peeve question. The last question was, or at least for this week, the last question that I want to go over is, this was interesting. It says, what's your opinion on car TV shows, like reality shows that are car related? So that's an interesting question. So I'm probably not shocking anybody when I say that the reality shows, car related or not, are not based in reality. So, maybe I just shocked a couple professional wrestling fans, but outside of that, I'm sure you guys probably understand that reality TV is anything but. And I have a personal story associated with that. So 8 or 10 years ago, it's a long story, but the short version is 8 or 10 years ago, the guy that produced that Gold Rush show that was popular for a long time on History or Discovery or whatever it was, landed in front of us. And when I say us, I mean the Estranged Car Club. And the club there were a lot of different members back then that are no longer members now. And there are a lot of members now that weren't members then. So it was a little bit different dynamic then. But long story short, through a series of strange events, the producer for Discovery or History, whatever it was, for all these shows, ends up in front of us at my friend Robbie's shop, which was kind of our area where we all met up or whatever. Big shop, tons of cars in it, where we worked on building hot rods and shit. And anyway, he shows up and he's pitching the idea of a reality show based around the car club. And so, like I said, this was a long time ago, a little bit different dynamic back then. But the short version is, initially, at least I think everybody was like pretty excited at the prospect of at least thought this was neat and maybe it could turn into something cool. And, maybe we're a little bit naive, but we learned very quickly how much bullshit is associated with that world. And the way we found out was, in one of the first meetings, he was like, with like a storyboard, and like this like dry erase board. And he's like just throwing out ideas and all this stuff. And he's like, okay, and who do you guys have like a rival? We're like, well, what do you mean? Like a rival car club. We're like, no, we don't think so. Like we don't give a shit. We don't, we don't have any like, we're not looking to rumble. So anyway, long story short, he's like, okay, well, here's what we're going to need. We need a rival car club so we can get some drama going here. And what I think we should do is we should take one of these cars and stuff it in a barn. And we'll get shit all over it, get it all dirty and stack boxes on it. And then we'll pull it out. We'll film it. And you guys will wash it off, and then you're going to build a car out of it. And your rival car club is also going to be building a drag race car. And this is going to be this big build off and all this drama. And then it's going to culminate on the racetrack, and you guys can race for pink slips. What do you think about that? And we're like, fucking what? He's like, yeah, so we're going to need a funny guy. We're going to need a serious guy. We're going to need the Joker. We're going to need an asshole. We're going to need like all these different personalities and shit. And we're just like, oh God. And then he started talking about scripts and all this shit. So anyway, needless to say, nothing ever came from that for a million different reasons, but it was definitely an eye-opener. And looking back, at least a chuckle-worthy story. So my opinion on reality shows that are car related is that they're probably all garbage. So yeah, that's kind of what I think. There are exceptions, of course. You know, there's going to be, you know, some scripting and bullshit associated with anything, but you know, I'm sure that, you know, like roadkill and stuff, I'm sure that that's pretty straightforward stuff, and it's not too highly dramatized, you know, and the guys that are on it are all straightforward type of guys that you can tell are hot rod guys. So, you know, there are exceptions, but for the most part, any reality TV show is going to tend to probably be straying pretty far from reality. So anyway, again, we ran a little bit long, so I'm going to wrap it up. That's all the questions that we have time for this week's episode. So there were 7 or 8 others that came through. I'm just going to stuff them away for next week. And yeah, I guess we will say our goodbyes. So again, ironandsteel.com is the website. Please go there, check out those 2 articles. Please hit the subscribe button and punch in your email. And yeah, that's about it. In the meantime, I will try to drum up some sort of a palatable story to read to you next week. But I guess for now we'll say our goodbyes, and I will speak to you again in exactly 7 days. Thanks again for being here.